Welcome to this on-demand webinar, OHSA Regulatory Requirements to Improve Crane Safety. This presentation is brought to you by the Infrastructure Health and Safety Association, the IHSA. The Infrastructure Health and Safety Association is Ontario's trusted health and safety resource. Our goal is to improve the lives of Ontario workers. We provide the resources and training that can help control and eliminate safety hazards in work environments involving high-risk activities. Our focus is on workers and keeping our promise to provide them with the tools to work safe for life. Just a quick disclaimer, the information contained in this resource does not replace the Occupational Health and Safety Act and its regulations and should not be used as or considered legal advice. Hi, my name is Andrew Harnham and I am a Coordinator Research and Stakeholder in Public Relations at IHSA, and I am pleased to have Guy Tailon and Saeed Korsan joining me from the MLI-TSD. Guy is a provincial specialist from the Construction Health and Safety Program of the Occupational Health and Safety Branch, and Saeed is a provincial engineer. We will be your co-hosts for today's session on regulatory requirements to improve crane safety. Welcome, Guy. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Andrew. Yes, I started with the Ministry of Labour in 2004 as an inspector for the Construction Health and Safety Program. And as you mentioned, I'm now a provincial specialist, and I've been in that role since 2007. I've worked with the industry to help develop regulatory amendments to improve crane safety in Ontario.
Perfect. Thank you, Guy. And Saeed, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Hi, Andrew and Guy. Yes, my name is Saeed Korsan. I started the ministry back in 2008 as a regional engineer. And starting this year, I'm the provincial engineer. My main role is coordination of all the engineering and technical work within the Ministry of Labour.
Perfect. Thank you, Saeed. And now I will turn it over to Guy to kick off the presentation.
Thanks, Andrew. So we'll start with the agenda. We'll be providing information on the changes to Ontario Regulation 4/2021, which contains requirements to provide notices and reports in accordance with the Occupational Health and Safety Act. We will cover the amendments to Ontario Regulation 21391 for construction projects around hoisting operations and the changes to the tower crane requirements. Most of the amendments will come into effect on January 1st, 2024, while some of the amendments will come into force the following year on January 1st, 2025. The 2025 changes will be identified as they appear in the presentation. To start, Ontario Regulation provides the ministry notices and reports. Failure to control a crane or its load, including any rigging failure, is now a prescribed incident at construction projects in Ontario. This may be the result of a problem with the crane's control system, mechanical components, any cable or the load block, the braking system, rigging arrangement, or rigging equipment supporting load. The regulation requires a constructor to give written notice to the ministry of the incident. The regulation also requires an engineer's written opinion stating the cause of the incident to be provided to the ministry within 14 days after the incident. However, an unattended crane is permitted to slew or rotate freely with the wind to reduce the forces from the wind pressure on the structure of the crane. Slewing or rotating with the wind is not considered a failure to control the crane. Next, we'll cover some of the definitions that have been added to the regulation. A definition is being added for self-erecting tower cranes. Self-erecting tower crane means a tower crane that is capable of being erected without the use of ancillary equipment. Parts of sections 156, 157, and 158 may apply to a self-erecting tower crane, depending on the configuration of the project. These sections will be discussed further in the presentation. In subsection 1.1, the reference to the regulation for non-destructive testing certification has been updated to allow for rolling reference of the qualifications for the certification standard of the people conducting non-destructive testing. Section 106 has added 2.1, and it covers signalers and operator interaction. It has been revised to allow communication through other means when using visual signaling cannot be achieved. One example is a blind lift by a crane, where the operator relies on a signaler or a swamper for direction. The signaler can direct the crane operator using a radio or an other means of clear, direct communication when the crane operator cannot see the load or the signaler. Here is a new section that identifies the updated CSA standards referenced in the crane, hoisting, and rigging sections of the regulation. For the CSA standard Z24817 is cited, it means CSA standard Z24817 code for tower cranes. And the Z15016 means the CSA standard Z15016 safety code for mobile cranes. And the CSA standard Z150.317 means the CSA standard Z150.317 safety code on articulating boom cranes. Section 150 states the requirements that must be fulfilled to be authorized to operate various hoisting equipment. This section covers the authorization, the training requirements, and the operator requirement for carrying proof of training while operating a crane or other hoisting device. In clauses A and B of subsection 150 sub 1 refers to the operation of mobile cranes. Therefore, the word mobile has been added immediately before cranes or similar hoisting device to provide clarification on the type of crane that requires compliance with the Building Opportunities in the Skilled Trades Act, or BOSTA. Subsection 151.1 has been revoked from the regulation. This requirement for certification does not apply to the operation of excavating equipment. Subsection 151 is for the operation of mobile cranes with a capacity over 8 tons and tower cranes. Excavating equipment may be used to hoist material if the manufacturer allows it. The operators are to comply with subsection 150 sub 2 and sub 3. Excavating equipment used to hoist material is one example of the term other hoisting device. The operators of a crane other than the one described in subsection 150 sub 1, such as overhead cranes or gantry cranes and derricks, are to comply with subsection 150 sub 2 for the operation. Same goes for other hoisting devices. Operators of other hoisting devices are also to comply with subsection 150 sub 2. So no worker shall operate a crane or other hoisting device other than the ones described in subsection 1 unless the worker has been trained in the safe operation of the crane or other hoisting device, or a worker is being instructed in the operation of the crane or other hoisting device and is accompanied by a person who meets the requirements of clause A. The requirement for written proof of training has been removed from subsection 150 sub 2 and added to subsection 150 sub 3. The term other hoisting device has been added to the regulation in various sections. This is to cover other equipment that is capable of hoisting material, such as excavators and lift trucks. We will go through the sections as they apply when we get to them in the presentation. So here's a before and after when it comes to subsection 150 sub 2. The word similar has been changed to other in the newest version. In subsection 150 sub 3, his or her changes to workers. Subsection 3 applies to both subsection 1 and 2. A worker shall carry the worker's written proof of training while operating a crane or other hoisting device. Subjecting a crane to a load greater than its rated load carrying capacity was prohibited even if it was required by the manufacturer for testing. Now, load tests required by the manufacturer are allowed to be conducted. The words other than during load tests required by a manufacturer has been added to subsection 151. The CSA standard referenced in 151 sub 2 are updated for determining the crane's load carrying capacity. Subsection 151 sub 2 requires the manufacturer of a crane or an engineer to determine the rated load carrying capacity of a crane in accordance with, for mobile cranes, the CSA standard 150.16, safety code for mobile cranes, or CSA standard 150.317, safety code for articulating boom cranes. And for tower cranes, it's a CSA standard Z24817 code for tower cranes. Previously, this section stated that every crane or similar hoisting device shall have affixed to it a load rating plate. This requirement was not practical for cranes with dozens of possible configurations. So 151 sub 3 was amended to reference load rating charts or charts and not just a plate. The operator must be able to read the load rating charts while at the controls of the crane to determine the maximum load that can be lifted for each configuration. To achieve this, subsection 151 sub 3 requires every crane to have affixed to it the load rating chart or a plate with the model and serial number or other traceable method that can be used in conjunction with the crane-specific load charts that the operator can read while at the controls of the crane while it's in use. This clause allows an ID plate and the load charts in a binder to be used. Here are some examples. On the top right, it's a load chart affixed to a boom truck. In the lower left, you'll see an example of identification plate, and beside that would be a binder matching the identification plate for the crane. The new section here for remote control operation compliance. If a work operator is using a remote control device, they shall have access to a load rating chart at all times. This is new for luffing cranes. As of January 1st, 2025, a luffing boom tower crane will be required to have a boom angle indicator that the operator can read while at the controls. Section 152 covers crane logs. You can get them at IHSA. Here is the changes to 152 sub 1. Basically, the changes that the term permanent record is now called owner's crane log, and the rest of this section remains the same. Requirement to keep records of all inspections and tests and repairs, modifications, maintenance of the crane to the crane or similar hoist device remains the same. Just the term permanent record is now called owner's crane log. This is a new requirement in the regulation that if there's no records or insufficient records that are required in subsection 1, a crane owner's log consisting of all records of all inspections, tests, and repairs, modifications, and maintenance of the crane. If that's not available, an annual inspection must be completed prior to the crane being put into service at the project. Once the annual inspection is done, this would be considered a starting point for the owner's crane log. For example, if the crane was bought secondhand or at an auction and there's no maintenance records, an annual would have to be conducted. The difference here from subsection 152 sub 2 and 152 sub 3 is basically the numbering. It's the same requirements. The only change that is here is the owner must provide the operator with the operator log prior to the crane being used at the project. So the operator needs to have the crane log before using the crane. 152 sub 4 has been updated. The logbook is to be kept up to date with a record of all inspections and of tests of, repairs to, and modifications to, and the maintenance of the crane while it's at the project. So it must be kept up to date as the crane's being used. It's another new requirement. Subsection 5 and 6 are both new. The owner is to add the information to the owner's crane log after the crane has been dismantled or removed from the project. The owner of a crane or similar hoisting device shall retain the owner's crane log and make a copy of it available to the constructor, employer, and any person designated by the constructor or the employer upon request. Personnel lifting. The amendments mirror the requirements of attachment methods described in CSA Standard Z150 for mobile cranes. The wording makes it clear that this section includes work platforms that are pinned to the boom. There's new word added to section 153 sub 1. No worker shall use as a workplace a platform, bucket, basket, hook, load, sling, or similar device that is capable of moving and is suspended from or supported by a direct attachment to the boom of a crane or similar hoisting device, or supported by a cable attached to a crane or similar hoisting device, except in accordance with this section. The graphic in the corner is directly from the CSA Standard Z150 2016. As an example of a pin platform. Clause 153 2B III clarifies the secondary means of support for a suspended platform. A crane may be used to raise, support, or lower a worker only if the platform that the worker is on is equipped with a secondary means of suspension or support that is secured above the hook and does not impede the hoist line. The example here is also from Z150 of the CSA standard. Words has been added here to clarify the availability of the load chart to a worker at the controls, or otherwise available to an operator at the controls of the crane while it's in use, is similar to the requirements in section 151 for a load chart, rating chart. Subsection 153 sub 9 has been amended by removing the word visually. A competent worker shall inspect a crane and rigging is not limited to the visual only. Other inspection instructions may apply depending on the application. 153.11 has been modified by removing the requirement to only call by telephone. This allows for other methods of notification. In subsection 154 sub 1, the terms climbed and erected have been added. The term climbing or climbed is as defined. Climbing is a process whereby an entire crane is raised on or within a structure that is under construction as the height of the structure increases. So section 154 requires a crane or a similar hoisting device to be set up, assembled, climbed, and erected, extended, and dismantled only by a competent worker. There's a new section that's been added, new subsection that's been added to 154. This requires every portable or removable counterweight, test block, and ballast used on a crane to be accurately weighed and have their weight clearly marked on them. There's a new clause for 156. An outrigger or stabilizing device used on a crane or other hoisting device shall be set up only after the ground-bearing pressure has been considered by the operator. This is to ensure that the crane is set up on ground that can support the crane and the maximum load it can carry during the load handling activities. The manufacturer's operating instructions and specifications for the crane should provide information about the pressures exerted by the crane. Previously excavated soil and other voids may affect the stability of a crane. Turn it over to you, Saeed, for the next part of the engineering presentation.
Yes, so section 157 spells out the requirement for installation and design requirement and report. This section talks about proper bearing capacity and reshoring and bracing requirement for the tower crane and all the required paperwork. So basically the engineer's role is to confirm the bearing capacity meets the design requirement of the foundation, and also ensures that the rebars arrangement numbers and sizes are within the design criteria. And after the concrete is poured, ensure the concrete strength meets the required design. So a tower crane, other than a tower crane mounted on a traveling base using a traveling undercarriage or a self-erecting tower crane that does not require foundation, shall be erected at a project in accordance with this section. As I said previously, the foundation, shoring and bracing supports tower crane or ties shall be designed by an engineer and constructed and installed and dismantled in accordance to the design drawing. The engineer who prepares the foundation design drawing shall consider the ground bearing pressure and capacity in preparation of the design, and where a building or structure is supporting a tower crane and the tower crane is attached to a structure, the engineer of record or another engineer should review the forces that are exerted by the tower crane to the building and ensure that the structural integrity of the building or structure is maintained. So an engineer shall sign the design drawing for the foundation, shoring and bracing after they approved it, and the constructor shall keep all that paperwork and stamp drawings at the project for shoring, bracing, and foundation. Also, an engineer shall inspect the foundation supporting the tower crane before the concrete is poured and prepare written report and confirm the foundation and support surface complies with the foundation design drawing and subject to any deviation from the design and approved in writing. The written report shall be kept at the project, and the crane shall not be erected until the foundation reaches the concrete foundation reaches the strength specified by design, and the shoring and bracing that supports the tower crane must be inspected by engineer after shoring and bracing or tines have been installed and before the crane is put into service for the first time. So an engineer shall prepare a written report of the inspection required under subsection 10 and include confirmation the shoring and bracing and ties have been installed in accordance with design drawing, and where a building structure is supporting the tower crane, whether the building or structure has been reached sufficient strength to resist the crane reactions. The written report prepared shall indicate any circumstances that would require additional inspection of shoring, bracing, and tie-ins by engineer after initial inspection required. So after initial inspection required under subsection 10, the shoring and bracing components and tie-ins installed for climbing operation shall be inspected by a competent person, by competent worker, unless otherwise specified by the engineer in the written report, before and after each climbing operation to ensure the shoring and bracing components and tie-ins are installed in accordance with the design drawing. And weekly after each climbing operation to ensure that all installed shoring and bracing and tines are in place. Each major component used for shoring the tower crane shall be clearly marked, stating that the component shall not be removed or repositioned unless authorized by engineer. Here's a sample of a label that could be used at the project to mark the components that needs to be maintained at place unless authorized by an engineer. These are three new requirements, section 157, 1, 2, and 3, that talks about requirement for the crane being installed in a plumb condition, and also requirement from CSA 24817, clauses 5.1, 5.8, and 5.9, and also the new requirement for the design that comes into effect in 2025. So the plumb tolerance is required by regulation to be 1 to 500, which basically in 500 vertical, only 1 horizontal, and the plumb should be the tower crane should be installed in a straight and plumb condition and kept and that way during operation. On January 2025, the following will be added to the regulation. A tower crane shall be erected, dismantled, and climbed in accordance with the following clause of CSA 24817. Clause 5.1 talks about crane erection crew. Clause 5.7, erection, climbing, and dismantling equipment. And clause 5.9, general erection, climbing, and dismantling procedure. The new design requirement will kick in January 2025, and basically requires the crane to be designed in accordance, any crane manufactured on or after January 2025 to be in compliance with the clause 4.1 to 4.25 of CSA 24817 or European Standard EN 14439 2006 plus A2 2009. In addition to that, they should comply with the Electrical Safety Authority Specification 009 R0, electrical safety for tower cranes, and the control systems shall be in compliance with clause 4.21 of CSA 24817. If a tower crane manufactured before that date does not meet these standards or equivalent, should the standard that those tower cranes are designed to should be reviewed by an engineer, and that engineer should determine whether or not that crane is in compliance with the standards listed in the table. So inspection for the tower crane used to be only for the structural component. Now regulation requires, in addition to structural components, its electrical, mechanical, and hydraulic components and control system to be inspected as per Ontario Regulation 26008, which is the performance standard made under the Professional Engineers Act. This section spells out the requirement of the inspection to be done, and I'll talk about them. Can you go to next slide? So section 158.1 talks about requires an engineer shall ensure that a tower crane's structural element, its electrical, mechanical, and hydraulic components, and its control system are inspected in accordance with the performance standard under PO, and that any defects identified at the following times. So for the tower crane, other than a self-erecting tower crane, the inspection should be conducted before the tower crane is erected at the project, and another inspection after the tower crane is erected and before it's being used, and thereafter every 12 months or as often as is recommended by the crane manufacturer, whichever is more frequent while the crane is erected. For a self-erecting tower crane, the inspection shall be conducted before the tower crane put into service for the first time, and thereafter at intervals not greater than 12 months while the crane is in use at the project, or every 12 erection of the crane, or as often as recommended by the crane manufacturer, whichever occurs first. The inspection of the structural components must include non-destructive testing to ensure that the structural integrity of the crane is maintained. This inspection shall be conducted, is required by the regulation to be conducted before crane is erected, unless an engineer decides while the crane is erected, a non-destructive testing is required, then they should be doing that. So section 150A3 basically requires a better and enhanced report as prescribed by Ontario Regulation 260 performance standards under PO. The engineer conducting the inspection or under whose direction an inspection is done shall prepare a written report of the inspection and test result in accordance with the performance standards for the inspection of a tower crane as prescribed by Ontario Regulation 260-08, including confirmation that all components are in adequate condition. A tower crane shall not be used until any defect identified in the inspection have been corrected or repaired in accordance with the instruction of the tower crane manufacturer or an engineer. A tower crane shall not be used until the tower crane has been inspected by an engineer and the engineer has prepared a written report of the correction, repairs, and result of the inspection, confirming that any defects identified have been corrected or repaired and the corrected or repaired components are in adequate condition. So basically the report shall include items that has been inspected, the issues has been rectified, and confirmation that the crane is safe for use. An engineer shall ensure that the climbing system for a tower crane is inspected in accordance with the performance standards for inspection of a tower crane as prescribed by performance standard under the PO prior to initial climbing operation of the tower crane at the project, and thereafter at intervals not greater than 12 months while the tower crane is erected at the project. The engineer conducting the inspection or under whose direction an inspection is done shall prepare a written report of the inspection in accordance with the performance standard for inspecting a tower crane as prescribed by performance standard under PO, and should include confirmation that the components are adequate. Section 159.1, which will be kicking in January 1st, 2025, is a new requirement for new comprehensive 10-year inspection. So regulation requires the tower cranes to be thoroughly inspected 10 years after they have been manufactured, and after that, every 10 years. So basically at year 10, 20, 30, and so on, if the tower crane is in use after that. An engineer shall ensure that the tower crane's structural elements is its electrical, mechanical, and hydraulic components and its control system that may affect the structural integrity, stability, or motion of the tower crane or its load are inspected according with subsection 2 before a tower crane is erected at the project if 10 years have elapsed since the time the tower crane was manufactured, and thereafter at least once every 10 years after the date of the last inspection under this section before the tower crane is erected at the project. The inspection required under in subsection 1 shall include the following: inspection of the structural components, including visual inspection of all welds and non-destructive testing of a sampling of welds determined by an engineer, and measurement of the consistency of wall thickness within the closed section of the structural components to confirm the sections are compliant with the original design requirement. Inspection of rotating shafts, gears, hook blocks, mechanical linkages, for signs of cracks, damage, or wear using non-destructive testing. For hydraulic components, measurement of the pressure at which pressure relief valves actuate, and testing of hydraulic holding valves used to stop movement in the case of pressure loss. Measurement to confirm that components that routinely wear due to use, including clutch plates, brake pads, sheaves, wire ropes, bushings, and pins, are within tolerance specified by their manufacturer. Inspection of non-structural components that may be subject to cracking, damage, or wear. Performance of operational tests on the components listed below in accordance with the manufacturer's instruction to confirm that the components are in an adequate condition and operating in accordance with the manufacturer's specification. Components include brakes, slew rings, hydraulic motors, hydraulic pumps, valve blocks, hoist and loft drums, gearbox, and drive shafts. The operation tests required under paragraph 6 of subsection 2 do not require the components to be dismantled. The other inspection might require dismantling of the components. The engineer conducting the inspection or under whose direction an inspection is done shall prepare a written report of the inspection, including test results, observation, measurements, and records. Any defects identified in the inspection that may affect the structural integrity, non-structural components, the stability or motion of the tower crane or its load shall be corrected or repaired in accordance with the instruction of the tower crane or component manufacturer or an engineer. An engineer shall confirm in a written report that any defects identified have been corrected, repaired, and that the corrected or repaired components are in adequate condition. Section 160 talks about limit switches. In the past was only limit switches for trolley, travel, and maximum moment and load. Now other limit switches are required. Devices to limit travel, loads, encoders, and strain gauges. A tower crane shall have limiting devices to, as applicable, limit trolley travel at both ends of the boom, stop boom laughing at the lower and upper limits of boom movement, stop load block, upward motion before two blocking occurs. A tower crane shall have limiting devices to, as applicable, limit crane travel at both ends of the runway tracks, limit maximum load lifted in each gear ratio, and prevent overloading the crane by limiting the lifted load in accordance with the operating radius. The tower crane shall have limiting devices to, as applicable, limit the maximum load lifted to the allowable line pull and limit pressure in hydraulic or pneumatic circuits, load and radius indicating devices, and such other devices, switches and devices as the manufacturer specifies. Now
Thanks,
I can
Saeed.
turn it back to Guy.
Thanks, Saeed. Under 161, a competent worker shall perform operational tests on the tower crane to ensure that its limiting and indicating devices are installed and functioning in accordance with manufacturer's specifications or an engineer's instructions. All clearances and alignments are adequate. Gearing and all other moving parts are operating correctly. Controller switches and other control devices are operating correctly. All limit switches are operating correctly. All circuits, interlocks, and sequences of operation are operating in accordance with the manufacturer's specifications, and all protective devices are operating correctly. The audio device near the base of a traveling crane is operating correctly, and each motion of the crane operates in accordance with the manufacturer's specifications. The new section 161.1 requires daily, weekly, and monthly inspections to be conducted in accordance with section 161. While a tower crane is used at a project, its components shall be inspected by a competent worker in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions, but at a minimum, the following inspections shall be done. Daily, a competent worker shall inspect all structural pins and keepers, ensure all wedges and slab openings are in place and tight, ensure all guy lines and all guy line connections are, if used, are adequate, inspect mass bolts, anchor bolts, ensure all limit devices except the line pull limit switch, signal lights, audio and visual indicators, and brakes are operating correctly. Visually inspect all wire rope cables that wind on a drum or pass over a shib that may reasonably be inspected to be used in that day during that day's operation of the tower crane for damage or possible evidence of rope failure. Inspect grounding connections, inspect the tracks for loose connections, proper drainage, subsidence, and bogie wear on traveling cranes. Inspect rail clamps if used daily or each time their application is made, and inspect the turntable bolts. Every week, a competent worker shall inspect all trolley roller tracks, slewing rings and rollers, all gear shafts, belt drives, all sheaves, bearings and pins, all guy ropes, pendant lines, cable clips, thimbles and furls, all jib backstops and boom stops, all rope attachments, all walkways, handrails, ladders, the location in the structure where accumulation of water could result in damage to ensure that the water is being drained, any tie-ins to the slab or other bracing systems that are used, and any components recommended by the manufacturer. Every month, a competent worker shall inspect all running ropes in accordance with clause 6.5.1.3 of the CSA standard Z24817 for all types of deterioration, all mast and boom structures for cracks and buckling, traveling cranes for bogie wear, counterweight supports, brake adjustments for wear, drums, sheaves, bearings, and mounts, and any components recommended by the manufacturer. Cranes are to slew freely when left unattended by releasing the slew brake. This is also known as weather vaning. The front jib is longer and heavier and will move in the direction of the wind, helping reduce this pressure put on the tower. The purpose of weather vaning is to prevent any damage that could result by the force of the wind. By allowing the tower crane to move with the wind, it removes the pressure and force that could otherwise cause excessive pressures on the structures and potentially even overturning. Section 162, there's no change in subsection 1, it remains the same, but sub 2 and 3 are new. This section covers unattended and out of service tower cranes. When a tower crane cannot slew freely because of the circumstances, it may be secured in accordance with written procedures of the crane manufacturers or written procedures prepared by an engineer. Unattended or out of service tower cranes shall be secured in accordance with clauses 8.7.1 to 8.7.5 of the CSA Z24817 standard, which includes disconnecting the power supply and preventing unauthorized access to the crane. 162.1 is another new section added to the regulation for anti-collision devices. This will come to enforce on January 1st, 2025. It'll address multiple cranes at a project and anti-collision devices. Where there's multiple cranes at a project, the hoisting operation shall meet the clearances requirements set out in clause 8.10 of CSA standard Z24817. Subject to section 164 has been added to the beginning of section 102. This amendment will allow the suspended load to be left on a hook of a crane without the operator at the controls. It's to balance the crane where there isn't room for a crane to slew or rotate with the wind and when it's left unattended. Section 164 requires a load block of an unattended tower crane to be left empty at the top position and located at the minimum radius specified by the manufacturer or approved by an engineer. The only exception of this requirement is that if the crane manufacturer specifies or engineer approves that a weight needs to be left secured to the load block of an unattended tower crane to balance a crane if it cannot slew freely. This allows a load to be secured to the load block of the tower crane to relieve the stresses by balancing the crane if it cannot slew freely due to obstructions such as another structure or a crane at the project. Unattended or out of service cranes must also be secured in accordance with clause 8.7.1 to 8.7.5 of CSA standard Z24817 Tower Crane Code. As of January 1st, 2025, section 162.1 requires tower cranes to meet the clearance requirements in 8.10. And this clause addresses operating zones for overlapping tower cranes and the use of anti-collision devices, operating procedures, and communication requirements. Prior to that, this is what this 164 said. Unless otherwise specified, the manufacturer or approved by an engineer, the weight needs to be secured to a load block of an unattended crane to balance the crane that cannot slew freely. The load block of an unattended crane should be left empty at the top position and located at the minimum radius specified by the manufacturer or approved by an engineer. Back to you, Saeed.
Thank you, Guy. Section 165, rail-mounted tower cranes. The regulation spells out the requirement for cranes that are mounted on the rails. Section 165.1, the track foundation and track, including rails and ties of a tower crane mounted on a traveling base using a traveling undercarriage, shall be capable of carrying all loads to which it's likely to be subjected without deformation or settlement that affect the stability of the crane. Design drawing for the track foundation and track, including rails and ties, shall be prepared by an engineer in accordance with the crane manufacturer specification. The track foundation and track, including rails and ties, shall be inspected by an engineer in accordance with the performance standards for inspecting a tower crane as prescribed by performance standard, PO performance standard, before a crane is placed on the track to confirm the track foundation and the track have been installed in accordance with the design drawing. The undercarriage of a tower crane mounted on a traveling base shall be fitted with rail clamps that can be firmly attached to the rails to lock the crane in position. A tower crane mounted on a traveling base using a traveling undercarriage shall be locked in position on the rails when not in use. A tower crane mounted on a traveling base using a traveling undercarriage shall have rail stops or bumpers that extend at least as high as the center of the undercarriage wheels and that are securely attached to the both ends.
Thanks, Saeed. 168 covers wire ropes and hoisting cable requirements. New to subsection 168 sub 1 is that synthetic rope may be used if recommended by the manufacturer. And this also means the manufacturer will provide inspection requirements because the inspection requirements listed in the regulation are for wire rope. Subsection 2 of 168 talks about the compatibility of the wire rope for the crane and to ensure it has kept at least 3 turns on the drum. Subsection 3 requires the information of the wire rope that's listed in the regulation to be recorded in the crane operator's log. Subsection 4 of 168 covers the rejection criteria for hoisting cables. Subsection 5 allows any damage of a cable to be evaluated by a competent person to determine if it's being taken out of service, should be taken out of service. And subsection 6 of 168 covers the rejection criteria for static cables or pendants. Subsection 7, rotation-resistant wire rope shall not be used for a cable for a boom hoist reeving unless specified by crane manufacturer as pendants. Subsection 8, rotation-resistant wire rope shall not be used where the inner wire or strand of the cable is damaged or broken. It's the new section that's been added to the regulation. Section 168.1, swivels shall not be used on a boom hoist cable on a tower crane unless they are explicitly permitted by tower crane manufacturer and a wire rope manufacturer, or an engineer evaluated the tower crane and the wire rope and determines that a swivel may be used. The main change in section 169 is just the term other hoisting device is taking place of the term, and similar hoisting device has been removed so that this section must be complied with by other hoisting devices. Similar to this section, other hoisting devices are now to follow this section. Section 171 has a new part, section 171 sub 3 has been added, that all wire rope terminations used on a tower crane shall be proof tested after installation onto the wire rope in accordance with the manufacturers of the wire rope or termination manufacturer, but in no case no more than 50% of the wire rope's nominal or minimum rated breaking strength. And the permanent record of the proof testing shall be kept for the life of the termination. Section 170, subsection 175 sub 2, no overhead weight used on a cable of a crane also applies to other hoisting device. It shall be split. For section 179, any tag lines or guide ropes used on a load also applies to other hoisting devices. Thank you. Now I'll pass it back over to Andrew.
Thank you, Guy. And don't forget to check out and subscribe to our social media channels, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn, as well as our publications like the IHSA magazine and 2-Minute News. I want to take this time now to thank our safety partner, the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development, and a big thank you to Saeed and Guy for providing us with such detailed information on the upcoming changes to the regulation. On behalf of IHSA, I would like to remind everyone that we are here to help, and you can simply call or click to get information. And we hope that you will visit us at IHSA.ca, and please work safe for life.